Hello, everyone. Welcome from wherever you are calling in from around the world. My name is Dawn Dole, and I am the Taos Institute Executive Director. And I want to welcome you to this dialogue with the author today. We're really excited about the book and Harlene Anderson and Diane Gehart that is joining us today. The book that we have is Collaborative-Dialogic Practice, Transforming Relationships and Conversations Across Contexts and Cultures. With this new book, we're really excited. I'm going to put myself on spotlight just for a minute so I can see so we can see each other. Diane is, and if you want to keep yourself on mute, that would be really helpful. Diane is the Associate Professor in Marriage and Family Therapy at California State University, Northridge faculty member at Malberg Institution and has practiced psychotherapy for over 15 years. She's co-authored Theory-Based Treatment Planning for Marriage and Family Therapists with Amy Tuttle, co-edited Collaborative Therapy, Relationships and Conversations That Makes a Difference with Harlene, the book we're going to be doing, similar to that, and has published many articles in the area of family therapy. She's an active leader in the field of marriage and family therapy, having served on numerous state and national boards in family therapy. She was also appointed to the Sexual Misconduct Review Board of the Catholic Diocese of Fresno as consultant on sexual abuses. And she has studied Buddhism for over 20 years, having read original texts in classical Chinese and Tibetan. And her current research and writing focus is on integrating mindfulness into therapist training to enhance therapeutic presence, as well as exploring points of connection between postmodernism therapies and Buddhism, Buddhist psychology. So welcome, Diane. And then Harlene Anderson is co-founder of the Houston Galveston Institute and co-founder of the Taos Institute and Access Success. She's recognized internationally as being at the leading edge of postmodern collaborative practices as a thinker, consultant, coach, and educator. Harlene has authored and co-authored numerous professional writings, including her book, Conversation, Language, and Possibilities, A Postmodern Approach to Therapy. She is a member of the editorial review boards of several journals, has presented at numerous national and international conferences, and has consulted with a variety of organizations. She takes her tools, her insights, her curiosity, her engaging conversational style, her leadership styles, and her keen interest to help professionals turn theory into new and often surprising possibilities for their clients, students, and organizations. She embodies her own belief in learning as a lifelong process, inviting, encouraging, and challenging people to be inquisitive, creative, authentic, and open to the ever-present possibilities for newness in others and in themselves. So we're really excited about this. The Taos Institute offered these dialogue with the authors as new books come available, and we do these, maybe every month or every other month. And if you don't know the Taos Institute, we're a nonprofit educational organization focused on social constructionist theory and practice. And the focus on the relational, the appreciative, and the collaborative and dialogic practices are what we're really excited about these days. So I am going to turn over the call to Diane and Harlene. And let me get each of them on spotlight. So welcome. And we've got a lot of people coming in the room today. We've got people coming in from Canada and the UK, from Maryland and Japan and Arizona, Calgary, Ireland, more from Canada, Copenhagen, California, Texas, Helsinki, London, France, Canada, Toronto, Athens, Georgia, not Athens, Greece. I don't think we have anybody here from Greece yet today. Wales, India. So I just welcome to everyone, and Diane and Harlene, take it over.
So Dawn, thank you and Alex for organizing this and inviting us. So Diane, shall we begin with a history of the book?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Harlene.
I'll share a few words and then you can add in or edit or correct. So we were contacted by Rutledge. We had published a book, Collaborative Therapy, for them in 2007, and they wanted to know about a second edition or a revised edition. And so I talked with Diane and I told her why I did not want to accept that invitation, because I had been thinking about a different book. And that different book was not a therapy book, but a book that took ideas that had been developed within the field of family therapy and throughout my history of practice with my colleagues to offer ideas and a practice that really had application across venues, meaning across disciplines, across context, across languages. So the book is about collaborative practices in a variety of settings: education, research, climate activist change, businesses, right? Businesses, literature. I know I'm missing a lot of.
Yeah, we got mindfulness. We've got community organizations. So yeah.
Yes, in ancestral knowledge. So we really, what we did was we went and reached out to people that we knew and were excited about their practices. Okay. Both published authors and those who had not published before. Go ahead, Diane.
Oh, no, healthcare. Someone just reminded us healthcare. Susan McDaniel. Yeah, of course. Oh my God, that's an incredible chapter.
Yes. So collaborative dialogic practices really encourage relationships and conversations that create a generative space and promote meaningful transformation, even in the most difficult situations, including difficulties within the context and disciplines that we just mentioned. The approach involves an epistemological shift and what I call a mindset shift. And Susan McDaniel asked me why I use the word mindset. And I said, well, like using conversation instead of dialogical, it just seems like a more inviting, friendly, less pushback word. So mindset, just a shift in the way that we think about our world, ourselves, the people in it, what we do with each other, and how we do it. The how we do it is really very important. The work is grounded in social construction premises and postmodern philosophies, variations of both of those for sure. The main feature of the focus of the practice is the philosophical stance, which guides us as professionals in particular ways of being, talking, thinking, and acting with others. Something you might want to add right now, Diane?
No, I'm getting to show them. I'll be sharing the screen in a moment. Whoa, we got some background. No, keep going. You're doing great.
Okay, so I'm going to share a little bit about the two chapters that I authored, conceptual framework and the orientation, the philosophy of the practice, and what the practice looks like in action. And Diane's going to talk a little bit about her chapter, mindfulness, and how she connects that with a collaborative perspective. And then Diane will review the chapters with you, which we're very excited about and so surprised at what people created in their offering of their practice and the way that they did it. So we did not provide like a template or guidelines for a practice chapters. We just said, write a story about your work, do it the way you want to, so that you are you in the chapter and on paper. So the first chapter, I use the term conceptual framework. Again, a more friendly term is mindset. And the conceptual framework really focuses on ideas about language, knowledge, and self and relationship. And from that, I take the importance of being a critical and informed consumer of knowledge, to think in terms of knowledge as something that we do and create together, and also the importance of local knowledge. In other words, that the client, the student, the teacher, the professor, the supervisor, the manager in a company, that they bring their own expertise on their life and their encounters in their particular situations. And that the expertise that they bring is an extremely important resource for us to be able to use. And to be able to use that, you have to be interested in it, genuinely interested in it, and ask questions that are coherent with what they are talking about, the aspects of their story. So we would not begin with a map or a set of questions that we think are important to ask, or information or data or facts that's important to gather. So third on my list in the conceptual framework that I value is the idea that generalized knowledge can mask the complexities of life. In other words, it's very easy to work from generalizations, from categories, thinking in terms of types and kinds of people, categories of problems, and be imprisoned in those ideas or those ways of viewing others, rather than learning about the person sitting across from you, from them, and in terms of what's important to them and how they want to tell you what's important to them. It's very easy to fall into the trap that there's a certain way to tell a story. There's certain information that's more important than other information, etc. So shifting from conceptual framework and how that orients or guides, so to speak, the actions, what we do, and informs alternative ways to look, to listen, and to learn with the people that we work with. So it provides a freedom to uniquely interact and respond in ways that are congruent with the people and the occasions. So collaborative dialogic practitioners are interested in what I refer to as how-to knowledge. Diane has another book coming out that she's working on now, and it's called Therapy That Works. And I think of that as how-to knowledge, how we learn what really works from and in our everyday practice, which can lead us to be what you might think of as a reflexive practitioner, drawing together ideas from John Schotter, from Donald Schoen, and others who talk about how professionals can learn from their practice, which requires stepping back and taking the time to reflect on what we're doing, and also to learn, most importantly, our client's experience as to whether what we were doing with them is or was successful. We can think our work is very successful, and that's fine. However, the client, the people we work with, the student, the coachee, they're the ones whose voice is most important. So again, how-to knowledge that is learned in the doing, and therefore it is ever emerging. It's not static knowledge that's repeatable or duplicable. And so the conceptual framework really begins to inform what I think of as a philosophy of practice, or even broader, a philosophy of life, because both Diane and I lean toward the importance of there being some congruence, some similarity, some link between who we are in our personal worlds and who we are in our professional worlds. Now, that doesn't mean that in our professional worlds that we put on a white coat and follow a recipe, or people think about social constructionism or postmodernism, that anything goes. It's really not that at all. It's really being more congruent, walking alongside, walking with, talking with, thinking with the people we work with. So I usually in my writing talk about 7 aspects of the philosophy of the practice that I call the philosophical stance, how we want to be and interact in relationship and conversation with others. And it's sometimes my list of 7 are similar, and sometimes there are some variations because they shift as I move along in my life. So I'm going to pause there now, Diane. I feel like I've been saying a lot and talking very rapidly, and giving you an opportunity to talk about your chapter and the connection and the congruence and maybe the differences you see between collaborative dialogic practice and mindfulness practice.
Thank you. Thank you, Harlene. And I do want to just thank you for inviting me to be part of this project. It's been such a joy. It's really been such a journey. All y'all just publishing during the pandemic was a journey and a half with Harlene. But thank you again for inviting me to do this. And I think and by the way, Harlene's first 2 chapters in this book are really some of your best writing, Harlene. I really enjoyed it. It just, over all the years, it gets refined and clearer and clearer. And I just absolutely enjoyed this chapter. And I think maybe what I'll do, if you're cool with this, Harlene, is give them an overview of what's in the book. And then we'll talk about mindfulness, and then maybe you open it up for some questions and dialogue. I'd love to chat with you.
Sure.
Cool. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, was you going to say something else, Harlene?
I was just going to say that writing is a practice, and practice takes practice.
Yes, absolutely. It is a practice. It's very true. I always tell my graduate students to you've got to learn how to write, because a lot of them don't seem to want to. You got to learn how to write because it clarifies your thinking. And there's a dialectic between writing and thinking more clearly. And so I definitely torture some of my students would say I torture them with learning how to write.
That's so important. I often tell people who haven't written before, just write a story about your work, tell a story, and then wait a couple of days or a couple of weeks and go back and read it and think about how you remember the original aspect of your work and the story you created and what you've created since that writing.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so go for it.
Okay, so here is our table of contents. So those first 2 chapters are Harlene's, and this is a web page, and it does open up. I'm realizing we probably should have put the names there. But my niece just decided to be an MFT, and she was totally in charge of this web page. So that's really cool. So Harlene lays out the conceptual framework, and then really chapter 2 is a lot of the more application of it all. And then in chapter 2, Sally Ha-Bava, I think writes this incredible piece on the politics of collaborative dialogic practice. And this is really a very important chapter, because what Sally Ha does in this chapter is that she offers another framework for understanding power that I think we need in our society desperately. And she talks about how so often when we talk about power right now, looking, in social justice movements in particular, the only model of power we seem to really be talking about is about power over, right? And what Sally Ha reminds everyone, coming from a very social constructionist position, I think she relies a lot on Schotter for this, but is power with. How do we, does it always have to be power over? Can't we find a power with? And she doesn't call it a model, it's a diagram. I don't know what she corrected me when I called it a model on last Saturday. But she talks about how our utterances create our, through our words and interactions, even at a very micro level, we create our meanings. And it's those meanings that eventually feed the dominant discourses that affect, in turn, come back and in a triple infinity loop here, affect how we, the meanings that we have that then again affect our words. And all of these are interconnected. And I think she offers such an important way of thinking about power as you look around what's going, the conversations we're having around the globe, especially around race and gender and social justice and indigenous peoples. And there's just, there's a lot going on. And I think offering a more collaborative way of thinking about power is so valuable. So I do hope you check out that piece. And I'll talk more in detail about mine, but mine is curiosity as mindfulness practice. And it's funny, Harlene, I think that was supposed to have been dialogic curiosity as mindfulness practice, but we had some issues with the copy editing of this work. That's all I can say. And I don't know if Harlene and I really want to know if there are problems that you find. I guess we should know, Harlene, but I don't know if I want to. I already see a change that did not get into the final draft. But in this piece, what I talk about, because I've done a lot of work in the area of mindfulness, and Dawn, oh my God, I can tell I have not updated my Taos Institute bio in 15 years because I've been in practice for 30. and I've been a full professor for about 12. And I'd love to go back to the associate professor you described. I was like, wow, that used to be me. It was very fascinating. I actually loved that. It was a very interesting experience. It's like if you ever go back and look at pictures from yourself from a decade or two ago, you're like, wow, that was my life. So, but I have done lots of work in the area of mindfulness. And one of the, and this is the first time I've written a book that sort of connects this, but this was a really fascinating piece for me even to write. Again, it's about putting into writing what you're doing and you don't even realize that you're doing it, because I realize that when I work in a collaborative way, it's like a mindfulness practice for me, because there is this kind of moment to moment unfolding of meaning, and that is what I'm tracking. So I really kind of get down to the micro level of how I focus. And I know some people wanted in the chat were asking about, I want to learn how to do this work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then in chapter 5, which ends the first part of the book that kind of more sets a broad stage, touches on, I think, more of the therapeutic work in some ways. There's some comments about that in the chat here today. Marcia does this incredible thing where she takes the Nobel laureate speech of Toni Morrison and compares that to Harlene's work. And it's just really this incredible way of kind of comparing literary lens and then what we do in this work and the parallels. It's really, and it's called This Lovely Thing We Do Together, which is how the speech, I think, ends in there. And it's just really an amazing piece, totally fun. And then Susan McDaniel and Jenny Spees, I don't know if I say her name right, Harlene, did I get that? They share the work that they've done for, 20, 30 years, at least, maybe longer, 40, 50 possibly, in terms of working with physicians to use more of these collaborative dialogic practices to create more humane relationships with their patients and with each other, in case consultation with each other. She said it's often harder for them to do it with other professionals than their patients. But they have done such groundbreaking work, such important work, as we're all someday, hopefully, coming out of this pandemic. I think just our relationships with our medical professionals and just is ever more important, and the ability to have really meaningful conversations, and they just have such incredible work. And so this second piece, chapter 7 here, is Adela and Marlene, who are Brazilian therapists. And they go into extremely impoverished communities in Brazil. They use the term slums, and they don't have money for, traditional looking mental health interventions. And so what they've done is use collaborative practices and created a model where they bring people together in a community to have dialogues for how to improve their lives. It's really a beautiful, moving piece of how to use this work in in community contexts. And then in chapter 9, oh my God, I remember when Harlene told me about this, I was so excited. We have a group of Czech therapists who work in a climate justice collective, using these ideas to help the collective actually communicate with themselves, deal with the stress, and the burnout and hopelessness related to being an advocate for climate justice. And really, when you think of climate justice, it is a very justice-focused practice. And so what they're trying to do is take the same principles that they're applying to the environment with each other in terms of creating more democratic dialogue, compassion, and just humanizing conversations is how I like to refer to it. So wonderful piece, wonderful work there. And then this one, we have Sheila's work in terms of, many of you know, I think all of you know Sheila McNamee, and her work in terms of using collaborative practices, in an academic classroom setting, and how she has used this to create just educational processes that are just engaging, uplifting, and involve all who are there. And just so you know, we wouldn't put the citation here. If you're citing any of these chapters, we did the work for you right there. Because I really hate typing those out every time. So I had my niece put that together for us. Then we have another chapter on using collaborative practices in educational setting. And we have Richard and Sylvia London, who work and are bringing collaborative practices. Oh, is it K through 12 or 9 through 12? It's a Houston's private school, is what I know for sure. Javier Educational Academy. I can't tell you the grades off the top of my head. I apologize. Anyway, they were actually going to write a whole different chapter, and then the pandemic hit. And so they ended shifting. They were their whole focus in terms of just how through the pandemic, they use collaborative practices to communicate with the families, with the teachers, with the students, to navigate, which for any school was just unparalleled upheaval in the whole education process, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of people on different, pages with everything, and how they use this to navigate that experience. And the next chapter also comes from our colleagues in Mexico, where I love this one. They, I think, Nyeka and Sylvia were hired as consultants for a construction company, right? It's a construction company. And what they did is they used these practices to work with the communities and the clients, and I think they share one part where they, they're going to go build something in the community, and they just meet with people who are going to be affected by what they're constructing. I'm like, oh my God, imagine, we do it in such a hostile way in the United States. All these legal signs go up and we're going to be putting this here and you can come and fight with us, at City Hall about it and file your complaints with the courts. And instead they have these beautiful collaborative conversations about what the community needs before they do whatever their building project is. So humane. And the next is comes from a group of our colleagues in China, and Harlene was involved in writing this chapter as well. But this describes how an IT company in China found Harlene's work and started training all of their managers. I think Gao Yun and Dali Shi are the HR department, or leads in the HR department there. And they started training their managers in how to have collaborative conversations in terms of just running the day-to-day operations of the business. And they've been using this model for over 9-10 years, I think they said, and it's been incredibly successful. And they even have a nice little 4 W's is how they organize their conversations. They have a little thing that you can definitely pick, take, and use pretty easily. And then Jan in Canada she talks about using collaborative dialogic conversation in research in terms of how you have conversations with the people you are working with, and to really have the whole research process be collaborative in terms of how we're talking, what we're talking about, and often the action that comes with it, coming up with practical kind of action research. So she shares her work there. And finally, last but not least, and we ended with Dan and Sally. I'm sure many of you know them. We ended the first book with them, and we ended the second book with them again. And they just pick up, kind of echoing what Harlene had just said, that just how when you work this way, it's not separate from who you are in your personal life. There isn't like this role you take on and you do collaborative dialogic practice, at work, and then when you come home, you can be different. Because as Harlene said, it's a mindset. It is a way of looking at the world. And Dan and Sally actually talk beautifully about this and their journeys of living this work, day to day. And there isn't this divide. There isn't a divide like that. Okay. So, and then do you, Harlene, think I should go in and talk a little bit more about my chapter, maybe?
Yes, please do. It's quite interesting. Please.
Okay. Sure. Okay. So I'm going to just stop the share there. Oh, and if you want the website link, it is here. So in my chapter, I've been a professor for over 25 years, trying to teach master's level students how to do, family therapy is the type of program I teach in here in the United States. And the challenge is always teaching how to do this work. And so I've tried lots of metaphors over the years. And what I noticed, though, when I'm trying to explain to my students, because you're not just curious about anything in this approach. It's not wild open curiosity. It really is dialogic curiosity. And what by that I mean you are following the client's meaning as it unfolds. And there is this total moment, so you are fully in the present moment. Your mind never wanders. I've been doing this work for 30 years. And even today, when I sit down with clients I've seen for years, my mind never wanders. It's because you never know what new meanings and could have evolved since the last time I spoke with them. And so that's very much like mindfulness, which is a very present. Your mindfulness in a nutshell is, try to quiet the inner chatter. It never totally stops, guys. Yes, you will hear thinking, but you try to quiet it, while you're focusing on something in the present moment, most commonly your breath, and just trying to quiet that inner chatter, but you're bringing your attention to something that is happening in the present moment, such as the breath. You can also use a sound, or you can use a taste. And but in collaborative dialogue, we are focusing on the moment to moment unfolding. And it should take 110% of your brain power and focus, even if you've been doing it for 50 years, like Harlene. It takes everything you have to understand how they are making meaning. And you're doing it like mindfulness with compassion and non-judgment. And so there is, and for me, it's a familiar way of being that is similar to a mindfulness meditation, because I am fully engrossed in following. It's like a breadcrumb trail is one of the metaphors I use. And each word, each utterance, each nonverbal, I'm trying to track and understand the meaning, where it came from, how it's all coming together. The other metaphor, and I don't think I put it into this book, but I will share it with you because it is another way that I teach this concept. And I know we have many people from all over the world, so I will have to gloss this. But about 20, 30 years ago, so you kind of have to be old, there was a version of Star Trek, which is a science fiction movie, from the United States. This is the big old spaceship. And in the Next Generation one, if you know Jean-Luc Picard, those guys, they had a holodeck. And what a holodeck was this three-dimensional room that you could totally go in and program. And so the person went and programmed it. And it could be a childhood scene from your childhood. It could be a courtroom. It can be a futuristic planet. It is a world that you literally program in a computer. It's sort of like VR technology, but you can touch and see everything. So VR is not quite three-dimensional the way this world is. And I liken my working collaboratively to, you are in someone else's holodeck. They have programmed it, and you can make no assumptions. And so I like to say, the lions can be, grazing herbivores, and the gazelle could be apex predators. You have no idea. And the thing is, when you're in this world, you enter blindfolded. Okay, so you're vulnerable. They're guiding you. They hold your hand and give you on this tour. And all you have are questions to ask. And you have to ask questions to the client to explain what is in this world. And so that is often how I think about doing this work, because it takes this kind of radical level of curiosity, just not random curiosity, but about how the client is making meaning, how they're seeing things, how things work in their world. There's no judgment. There's just pure curiosity and compassion. And there is a bit of vulnerability. I also think in just being open to learning like this. And so anyway, that's sort of what I talk about, and kind of the concept. What I'm trying to capture is that where is the practitioner's mind when they're having these conversations? And I would say, most of the time you're focusing on their meaning. You do go back to your own internal dialogue. You cannot not connect with that, but it takes a lot of effort, I think, to track that meaning. So those are, so that's a little bit about my chapter. And maybe we can just open it up for, do you want to comment, or we're going to open up for dialogue and discussion?
I just wanted to comment on your talking about being present and connecting that with the mindset shift that I was talking about. Because I think to be fully present does require, for most of us, a mindset shift. And that is shifting from thinking of ourselves as experts on how another person is or should be living his or her life, personal or professional or business, and that you have to truly believe the other person has something worthwhile of saying, and that it's important for you to be able to learn that. That I don't think unless you can make that kind of mindset shift, you can be fully present, because otherwise you are categorizing and you are judging others.
Mm-hmm. And I bet you a lot of people are going to have the question, so how does change happen when you go on this holodeck tour, right? How does the change happen?
Well, okay, go for it. And I just want to mention that my chat has totally disappeared for some reason, so I don't see the question.
Okay. And yeah, I will. Did you? Oh, good. They put the Rutledge one in there too. Great. And so the change happens is, as the client is giving you the tour of their world, and you're asking questions that really is coming from a not knowing perspective, they also become curious. They begin to see connections that they never saw before. And it's like their own way of seeing their life, interpreting their life shifts. And just that little shift of perspective opens, you get a new angle. And with every new angle, there are new possibilities that become open and available, and new opportunities for, action. And sometimes you have a miracle session and like, boom, boom, you go in there and there's so much shifts at once. And sometimes it's a series of smaller shifts. But all of the shifts that happen, what I love about this approach is that all of these shifts that happen are happening from within the client's worldview. And that is why this is therapy that works, is because when you are trying to introduce a foreign concept to the client, right, they're free to go home and reject that concept if they would like. But when you're working within their worldview, and you're not the one reorganizing the furniture, so to speak, they're doing it, it's their worldview, and they cannot not see things differently when they leave. They understand. They've seen they've looked at their holodeck in new angles. They've discovered new corners of their holodeck, and they cannot not see it. And it's totally within their worldview. So when we talk about working respectively across culture and with diversity, this concept is so important to tread as gently as we can. And I think we're always working. You're always working across some kind of diversity difference between you and your client. That's always happening. I don't think it's ever not happening. And sometimes it's much easier to see than other times, but you're always working across that and just value differences. And you get the whole intergenerational, values that are also in there. So I think working in this way is quite simply the most respectful way I think we have to address these sorts of issues around diversity and social justice, and treading with sincere, profound respect with those that we are talking with. And that is why it's really, this book is phenomenal in the sense that it really highlights how this way of talking and being shifts everyone, not just in therapy, but across all conversations. And I think for me, and I know I'm going to have to write something about this someday, Harlene, but it's really, it humanizes both participants in the conversation. It is a humanizing conversation. Sometimes I think I'm going to write that chapter of that book, Harlene, humanizing conversation. And I think in this time in history, when everyone is so polarized, so many different issues around the globe. Sometimes I feel like it's just United States, but I think we have some of the more extreme news, I'm assuming. I don't know. But I'm always a little embarrassed. But that polarization we're seeing in the world today has really been a very dehumanizing process. And I think it is going to be so important for practitioners across all walks of life, not just in therapy, all professions, to have more of these conversations where we humanize the other.
And I think, Diane, all of the conversations that the authors talk about that they have with their clients and shows this humanizing aspect and the importance, I think, of keeping in mind for me that I'm a human being and I am encountering and working with other human beings, and that I want to treat and respect them in the way that I hope that others would do the same with me. So this humanizing cannot be emphasized enough, particularly in terms of what's happening in our world today. And I think that each author, each chapter shows a way of making a small difference in the world, because we cannot, I do not think, as one person or even a small group of people or a large group of people, change the total world. I think it's impossible, but we can make a difference in our own spaces. And that begins with how we interact and position ourselves with others and the intention with which we do that.
Well, Harlene, I will say this. You have changed millions of people around the world with your work, but yes, I do. Yes, not the whole globe, but you have had a profound, this work is just so important. I'm seeing a question in the chat, Harlene.
Let's see what you see, because
Yeah. So we have Glenn Newman is saying, please, could you say that? Yeah, I'm going to read it for you. He's saying, could you say something about working in this way with clients encountering intense emotions such as shame and failure? Do you want to speak to that, or I can speak?
I think we both could. I think what's important is to keep in mind, where does the idea of intense emotions such as shame and failure come from? Is this an interpretation that the therapist, the counselor has placed on someone? Or is this what someone is bringing in terms of their own language, their own descriptions? And if so, how to learn more about those words and the meanings? As Tom Anderson used to say, if you could walk into the word shame or failure, what would it look like? What color would it be? What would it be doing? If it's something that I am as therapist and thinking this sort of internal chatter, I might say, do you know, as we're talking, I'm thinking of two words that I don't know whether they'll fit your description of what you're experiencing, but let me just throw them out there. It may be something we can talk about. And I would say, okay, those two words are shame and failure.
Mm-hmm.
Does that resonate with you in any way? And if so, how? If not, and if it's something that they don't even pick up on my words, my question, I do not think of it as resistance or denial or anything like that. It's just, it doesn't appeal to them at this time. Let go of it, Harlene. It's not important. That's one example. What do you think about, Diane?
Well, this is a great question. And my students sometimes comment when they watch me work that, clients will come out with this great big, emotion of some kind, right? And why don't I do the Carl Rogers thing of like just digging deep, just digging into the emotion? And I do. So I think the concept of mutual puzzling that Harlene writes so much about is why it looks so different. So what happens when I'm working with someone who, has the intense emotions, I sit with them. I'm very, what do you call it again, present with them. But I become curious about it all. How did it come to be so shameful? How did this meaning, where did it come from? So I'm blindfolded in their holodeck. They're telling me this part of their holodeck is really, really shameful, and I can't see it. I mean, obviously there's empathy and sensitivity in my tones, but I'm not freaked out by it. And I think that is what clients love about collaborative practitioners. We don't freak when they show us the scariest, ugliest parts of themselves and their world that they think everyone's going to be shamed about. We kind of just stay compassionately curious about it. And we're right there side by side with them. And just recently I was doing a demonstration interview, and it was with a Black man who lives in an area where there aren't a lot of Black men around, and so very sensitive and wanting to be seen as a professional, be respected, taken seriously, was very important to him. And he was having health issues where he was having to cancel appointments because he was so ill, right? And this was shameful. I mean, horrifically shameful. And I was listening with him, and I asked about, so, are you getting feedback from your clients, that they think less of you? He's like, no, I didn't. And so I was trying to understand why this was so shameful for him. And I said, well, so where do you think maybe you got the idea that you not being 100% perfect on task all the time is a shameful thing? And he went right back to his childhood, where, coming from a very impoverished background, very difficult childhood, and always feeling like people were judging him because of social economic status. And it was like, that's where the shame is. And so it was an incredibly powerful session for the client. And what I didn't do is just reflect back shame and how painful that must be. We didn't dig into the emotion. I just stayed with him, and I could feel the shame. And I was just curious where that meaning came from. And this client was able to really easily put those pieces back together and make sense of it and pull it together. Sometimes they don't know. They say, well, I'm not really sure. And so then I just sit there with them, and we sit down on a rock in the holodeck together, and we just get curious. Where could it have come from? Let's look around this place. And so that's that mutual puzzling. And when the client realizes that you're sincerely trying to understand their world from within their worldview, they sit there, they roll up the sleeves with you, they get super curious about their own life. And that is when all of the shifts start to really fall into place, where they begin to see the new perspectives and the new angles. And so I would say that is another way to think about working with the shame.
And I'm thinking of something related to that, inspired by a question that just popped up on my screen from David. In our polarized world today, like in Ukraine, Ethiopia, trade imbalances, etc., does the book give us the how to go about peace dialogue? I think if I had an answer to the how and could show that and write about it, I would probably be a very wealthy person. But I do not have an answer to that. the way that I think about it is that we can only try to do something differently ourselves. The only people we can change in the world is ourselves, and hopefully in the way that we change, other people will begin to respond with us differently. One of the things that I do, people often ask a similar question, but they usually talk about it in terms of how do you work in an organization where people don't think like you do? That's what we're talking about in terms of peace. People who do not think like we do, or think we do, or wish that they would, that we cannot change the way another person thinks or acts. But I can be very curious about them. And it's in that curiosity, it's in that interest in the other person, as Diane was saying. People love to feel that you're interested in them, or at least that's my experience and my warped view, that people do like, because they feel like if you can be sincerely interested in them, and that's part of the mindset shift. It has to be a sincere interest, a sincere curiosity, a sincere valuing that their perspective for them is real and that it's important. And being interested, being curious does not mean condoning, does not mean supporting. But that's where something different comes from.
Absolutely. You know, Harlene, I'm going to disagree a little bit. I think there's a lot in this book and in your work that can help create more peaceful dialogue in these polarized conversations. I do think there's a lot of wisdom that can be used from this, but it goes right to what you're saying, Harlene. And I know we're going to run out of time here, and I'll share this brief little story around these polarizing conversations. And I will tell you, I guess I can say this here. So I was getting my hair cut one day during the pandemic, and I realized that my hairstylist had the opposite political views than I did. And my first reaction was, holy God, how do I get out of this and still look okay for work on Monday? And so I said, Diane, just take a deep breath, just get curious and listen to her. And so we spent the whole hour. I was just curious about her political views and where they came from and why she holds them and what are they really. And what I learned by the end of that, she did a great job on my hair, was that if you had a Venn diagram, we were like 80% on the same page in terms of where we were. And so every time I get my hair cut, I go in and I have a collaborative dialogue with someone who has opposite worldviews than I do. And it is one of the healthiest relationships, the most humanizing relationships. It actually reduced my stress. It reduced her stress. She says, thank you, Diane. I can't share this with anyone who thinks like you because I get attacked, immediately. And so both of our humanities grew through those conversations. So I go out of my way to find people of different opinions. And I ask questions, and if they will talk, I will listen. And it is very humanizing for both of us. And literally my stress goes down from having those conversations. There was a question.
And I think we're back to the only person in the room you can change is yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Someone was asking what's the difference between validating and the curious exploration. So validating can come from I'll say this, it's weird. Over the years, it's funny how like a very humanistic validating of emotion comes from it is a very distant expert position. I am hereby granting you the right to have your emotion. And so that is not how, and so that's not how we work. What's funny though, if you watched me, because I'm as you can tell, I'm Greek, very loud, big, so when my clients tells me something shocking or horrific, especially when there's like a social injustice, some people will laugh. I go like this, oh my God. And I show my shock sometimes. And it's a very sincere side by side, when people tell me sometimes what they've experienced. And it is very thoughtful. I wouldn't do that with someone where I thought it would be painful. I do it for people who haven't gotten validation. And my sincere kind of response to their injustice is they say, people are like, that is the response I expected from my boss or whatever. And it can be very validating, but it's not done from this hierarchical. It's done from a side by side. I am right here with you, mutual puzzling position. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Harlene.
Well, I was also listening to you and scrolling through some of the other questions. There are just so many wonderful questions that I wish we had time to respond to each one. People who repeat the same thing over and over again. I very simply think, okay, if somebody's saying the same thing over and over again, they think I'm not getting it. Or in Texas, we say not getting it, not understanding it. And so I want to be curious in a way that shows I'm interested in understanding. So I think that's a big trap for us, trying to understand something from our logic making or sense making map rather than from the other person's.
I just want to come in here and we're just about out of time. Diane and Harlene, this book is one of the most important books I think that's out right now. And I do hope that everybody on this call can get it. It's just got such a diverse set of ideas and practices and disciplines and different arenas where the collaborative dialogic conversations can happen. And I thank you so much for sharing this book. And I would also like to invite everybody to continue these conversations. Most of you probably know we're having a virtual gathering in November. And it's all about these conversations. It's all about these practices. What are people doing around the world to make a difference in our polarized, difficult, challenging environments, whether it's an organizational setting or a therapeutic setting or an educational setting. So we do want to just put the word out. I will send an email to everybody who participated in this call just so you have the links to this event. But continuing these conversations, being in dialogue with each other, and learning together is really what that event's going to be all about. So Diane is going to be presenting, Harlene's going to be presenting, and a lot of people from the book are going to be presenting and sharing during that November event and gathering. So please join us. And again, just thank you, everyone. This video will be available. We will make this video of this dialogue available, and Harlene's showing the book. Diane, the link you had to your website did not end up in the chat. So I wonder if you can add that link again for everybody. And I did put the link in the chat to buy the book from the publisher. It's also available on Amazon. So.
My husband ordered this.
And Diane, you're on mute.
It came today.
Thank you. Yes, they're there. And Harlene and I are hosting a symposium. We started it last Saturday. We're finishing it. We're getting virtual abstracts. So we'll have a nice web page up eventually at the CD therapythatworksinstitute.com/CD practices. We'll have some virtual abstracts so you get to hear from our authors. So we're kind of excited about that.
Yeah, so let's all keep connected, keep learning together and sharing these practices. We'd love to hear from all of you. So make sure you're signed up for the Taos newsletter and you'll keep updated on everything that's happening. And again, thank you, Diane and Harlene, so much for being with us today. And thank you all for joining in this conversation. Until next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you everybody for joining us. Look forward to seeing you in the future. And again, thank you, Dawn and Alex.